This is the Pumpkin Valley Practice Circuit Race. This is an excellent opportunity to talk about what happens to the various components of your VO2 max as you get older. Hey, cycling community, this is Steve Grusis, the Cycling Greek. I have been somewhat participating in these practice races for the last couple of weeks. So somewhat participating means I go out there, I get dropped on the first lap, and then I ride home. When I went out for this week's race, there wasn't that many people out there. So Mr. Mark Tucker, who leads this, says, let's keep this muted for a couple of laps, and this is a 5-lap race. That way, I'll get to hang on for at least a couple of laps. What typically happens is I get dropped on the flats when the speed goes up. I'm not trying to attack and do a breakaway. I'm riding these guys' wheels, and then eventually I just can't keep up. So I'm riding these guys' wheels. Why am I getting dropped? Is it because I'm competing against the local cream of the crop? That has something to do with it. Is it because that the others are ranging in age from 20 to the high 40s, and I'm 69? Probably. Since VO2 max is an important factor in this type of workout, this type of practice race, let's see how the various components of VO2 max are affected by age. As most of us know, VO2 max is the maximal uptake of oxygen by your muscles. The higher the VO2 max, the better. Let's now take a look at each of the steps of moving oxygen from the outside to your muscle cell to be used. The first step is getting the oxygen into your lungs, and that's going to involve the diaphragm. I haven't found much that the diaphragm is affected by age, but I would imagine that there is some sort of degradation that goes on. Now, I know there are tests where they measure how much air is expelled that you force out. So typically when you try and force all your air out, 20% stays in. As you start to age, the amount of air that you can expel goes down. Now, I don't know if there's a use it or lose it component to it. I mean, as you get older, you're going to start losing function, but the rate that you lose function, that I haven't seen any studies on. At the end of step 1, the oxygen is in your lungs. It's still on the outside, but it's in your lungs. The surface area inside the lungs is the greatest surface area in the body, even more than your skin. From what I understand, there are 40 different types of cells in the lungs, all to help you with breathing, all to keep you alive. From what I read, the lungs reach their maximal functionality right around the age of 25 or so. They do still improve for another 10 years to around the age of 35. Then they start that slow loss of function. Cellular aging in the lungs can be grouped into 3 different categories. There's genome-based failures, genomic instability, telomere attrition, and genetic dysregulation. Signaling dysfunction, and that involves nutrient sensing aberrations and cell-to-cell communication anomalies. Organelle compromise, and that's going to be mitochondrial problems and protein structure instability. Lastly, there are cell phenotypic changes. So that's fancy for stem cell exhaustion and loss of cell division. Okay, that's somewhat fancy, and you can deep dive into each one of those. So functionally what happens, or part of functionally what happens, is that you start losing your alveolar function. So those little alveoli are little sacs that's where the oxygen and the CO2 with the bloodstream exchange gases. You also start to lose mucociliary function, and that's what clears mucus from the lungs. You also start to lose elasticity in your lungs. Okay, that's step 2, the lungs. So now we have the oxygen in the bloodstream, and it's making that exchange with the CO2. You have to have red blood cells, and you have to have hemoglobin. Now, I haven't read any age-related issues with hemoglobin. The only thing really that I read is that with aging, there's a low-level inflammation that can occur, or that occurs, and that can have a negative effect on hemoglobin production. So now you have the oxygen attached to the red blood cell. It now has to get to the muscle. That's where the heart comes in. A major age-related significant issue with the heart, and that's assuming you exercise regularly and eat well, is your maximum heart rate. There is a governor, so to speak, on your heart that increases the amount of time between each beat as you get older. You don't want to be doing 200 beats per minute like you did when you were younger, when you're 69. And that brings us to the last step, when the oxygen is delivered to the muscles. The major age-related issue with muscles is sarcopenia. That's the age-related destruction of muscle cells, and once they're gone, they're gone. The less muscle cells you have, the less oxygen that can be taken up and used by those muscles. Depending on what you read, your VO2 max drops about 10% per decade, so for the average 1% a year after the age of 30 or 40, again, depending on what you read. I read a study about 10-15 years ago that 2/3 of that drop is due to muscle loss. If you minimize your muscle loss, then you're minimizing your drop in your VO2 max. So now let's go to the action on the screen. You saw where I was dropped, and then they pulled me back up, and now basically I'm hanging on for dear life. So what that means is I'm getting as close as I can to the wheel in front of me. If you see my shadow on the left, you'll notice that I'm getting as close to the top tube as I can to get as aero as I can. I don't recall if there was any wind, but if there was, it was slight, and so I was trying to avoid that too. I'm crossing wheels, and I'm watching that wheel too. I'm trying to hang on to the next right turn where I can get a little bit of rest because of that very slight wind. I'm using every trick I know, including cadence changes, but when the legs go, they go. And with that, I hope you enjoyed this video and have a better understanding of what you're going through if you're old like me, or what you're going to be going through. As always, remember, comment, like, subscribe. The Cycling Greek.